preliminary investigation into the collapse of a Hindu temple at Verulam, north of Durban, last Friday points to several shortcomings in the construction. 5 people died and 14 others were injured when the 4-story structure collapsed. Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure, Dean McPherson, says preliminary findings show that poor quality concrete and weak reinforced columns were used in the construction. He says authorities must identify the supplier and the builder to prevent similar building collapses in the future. The minister held a briefing earlier today.
Based on the information available at this point, the structure involved was a reinforced concrete multi-story building under construction comprising concrete columns, flat slabs and masonry walls. The collapse occurred while concrete was being poured, with reports indicating that work was underway on the upper levels of the building at the time of the incident. Preliminary evidence, including available video footage, points to a sudden structural failure, most likely triggered by a formwork or shuttering failure during the pumping of wet concrete. It has also been observed that substandard concrete material and substandard reinforced columns were used. It is vitally important, therefore, that we urgently track down the supplier and builder that use this material to stop this from happening anywhere else. We have been unable to do so, but we are working around the clock to track them down. Such a failure can and obviously imposes significant and abnormal dynamic loads on the floors below, loads that no building is structurally designed to withstand, resulting in a rapid and progressive collapse. Early visual assessments have also raised serious concerns regarding the quality of construction, including indications of misaligned structural elements and potentially substandard materials. Rescue personnel further reported that the concrete encountered on site appeared friable, which will require further forensic testing as part of the investigation. For those that were there, you would have noticed that the concrete was quite powdery in what we saw. Of particular concern are preliminary indications from the relevant authorities that no approved building plans were submitted, that no construction permits were issued, and that the building may have been occupied prior to the issuance of an occupational certificate, all of which would constitute serious contraventions of the national building regulations and standards. In the absence of these submissions, the relevant authorities were deprived of the opportunity to inspect, monitor, or intervene during this construction, and quite possibly they could have stopped it.
All right, let's have this conversation now. But first, let's look at some of the findings, right, that the minister had to announce a little earlier on following this particular collapse of this building. And I'm not sure if we're able to bring up some of those graphics that are looking at the sequence of events. There's the collapse occurring during the concrete pouring. Work was also underway on the upper floors. And then there was a sudden structural failure that was reported there. You heard the minister speak about this in the videos in particular. And rapid progressive collapse then followed when you are looking at the sequence of events. The investigation is currently underway. The site has been declared a crime scene and also has now been handed to the Department of Employment and Labour. Of course, that's also going to now look at some of the issues here around the issues of employment and labour. The SABC then probing its own part of this particular process to look at some of the criminal aspects of this, as well as a technical investigation that is currently underway now to look at some of the aspects here. Structural failure indicators, you're looking at a possible formwork or shattering failure, abnormal load placed on lower floors, and that is quite serious. And you look at a structure that's not designed to carry such stress. So one would then ask, why is it something that the builder did not see? Failure triggers, of course, then triggering that particular chain collapse. And these are some of the structural findings, the regulatory breaches that have been identified is that there's no approved building plan submitted, no construction permits issued, authorities unable to inspect the site, but also possible illegal occupation. And these are some of the big concerns tonight as we have a conversation with the CEO of the Construction Industry Development Board of South Africa, that is Bongani Dladla. Very good evening to you, and thank you so much for your time. Firstly, a number of concerns are being raised. They've been raised since we first heard about this particular story. Does this preliminary report surprise you?
Well, having been to the site immediately after the collapse, the findings that are there actually reflect the reality that we saw on the ground. There were a significant number of regulatory failures, ranging from the planning stage, construction stage, and during when the collapse happened. So when you look at the findings that have been detailed by the Council for the Built Environment and other experts, it is true we can associate ourselves with those findings.
And when you look at even another finding of grave concern, right, as you look at the construction quality and what was happening at the time, the quality of the material that has been used also in question here. How big of a problem is this from your vantage point when it comes to other construction projects?
In absence of knowing who the engineers were, in absence of knowing who the contractor, whether they were competent to undertake the work, the engineers, whether they were competent to supervise the work, and the material supplier, whether the materials they were bringing were accredited, it's quite a serious concern for us. Hence, the minister has outlined as one of the main priorities to identify those parties and ensure that if they are currently undertaking any other project in the country, we ensure that we can find out whether they are using still substandard material to avoid any imminent failures that we are looking at. Hence, one of the main priorities from the investigation is to identify all the stakeholders. Hence, we are working with the municipality at eThekwini, the provincial government department, and national, including Department of Labor, to identify first who were the stakeholders that were involved.
And the minister says that they cannot be tracked, right? He's speaking about the builder and the supplier here, that he says it's not possible to track them right now. You are in the industry. What would make it difficult to track down these individuals? Because one would assume, if they're outside, like myself, that it's information that's easily available.
The biggest transgression that I saw when I went to that site is that no clear records from the point of who is on site. You know, on an ordinary construction site, that's why we find very rigorous protocols when you enter a construction site. You put your name, your number, and the company that you come from, so that if there is any incident that happens, we can be able to account for whomever is on site. Here, there wasn't even a site office where we could find such records. No health and safety files were found on site to even know the sequence of work that they were undertaking, which makes it extremely difficult. So what we are looking at first-hand accounts of people that were around there, the video footages that we saw that described the collapse, to see if we can identify any of the stakeholders. We went as far also as including a car that was trapped there to figure out the number plate, the signage, the car that you're showing now on the screen, that Uno, to see which company it belongs to try and piece these different pieces of the puzzle to know who were the stakeholders that were involved, because it's quite important to ensure that similar tactics are not being used in construction sites happening currently in Durban.
Quite concerning. And I wonder, when you then are looking at the construction projects, because one of the areas of criticism here is that there is no active compliance checks, for example, that would be done from a municipality's point of view. Then you have others who say that it's so difficult for a municipality to maintain or manage some of these construction projects if they are not being reported to the municipality. Yes. So how do we better, improve the record of compliance here from a municipal standpoint?
Yeah, we need our citizens to also actively get involved in informing the municipality and other stakeholders of construction sites that are happening. If you see a construction site without a signboard, that is a red flag number one, to say the possibility is that it has not been declared with Department of Labor, the local authority, or the CIDP. So that should be one of the red flags. And the minister also raised something that is quite important, to make each and every construction worker a possible inspector on site where they see some of these transgressions. So we have to work harder in ensuring that everyone who interacts with the construction site knows when to report when they see such transgressions. It could range from simple things where basic health and safety etiquettes are not observed, to things where you see structural failures, including cracks, settlement, and other elements of construction that would ordinarily not look normal, so that we can quickly alert the municipalities. But it becomes extremely difficult if some of these projects are not declared. And it seems like this project, having not being declared with the municipality, was actually happening at a highly accelerated pace for the structure and the complexity that was involved.
Sure, and especially if you're hearing then that, you will have poor quality concrete and all of that, and that is quite concerning. So I want us to look at some of the recommendations that have been made, so, right now, and see how far enough do they go. There is now an immediate, some of the immediate recommendations to detect illegal building activities nationwide, monitor large concrete deliveries, alert municipalities to active sites, public awareness on public approvals. We've spoken about some of these, but there's one I want us to zoom into: the large concrete deliveries, because these are critical. And I suppose it could also help, like we were saying earlier on, to avert some of, the big problems there. But from where you sit, what could be the telltale signs of a poor quality concrete?
Well, obviously, if you see a concrete, there are basic tests that one can conclude, and you'll find a lot of the construction workers. Hence, I seriously advocate for us to provide more training to construction workers, because they are there every day. Where you see the slump of the concrete, when you pour the concrete, it immediately flattens out. That is a significant challenge. Or you see a concrete that cannot be compacted, that includes too many voids. That is also a serious consideration, because with whatever void you have in the concrete, it reduces its strength. But you'll find that a lot of our construction workers and experienced foremen will be able to detect earlier on whether these structures will not hold. But we need a proper reporting line and whistleblowing lines, so that they can be able to report to the authorities without any fear of intimidation, so that we can send in inspectors, be it Department of Labor or the local authorities, including the municipalities. So those are quite the immediate steps that we need to take to ensure that we can be proactive rather than reactive to such disasters.
Bongani, appreciate your time. Thank you so much for talking to us. It's an ongoing conversation, and one can expect that you and I will chat again. Thank you for speaking to us, CEO of the Construction Industry Development Board of South Africa. That's Bongani Dladla.